Good morning. Good morning. Had to remember to turn on the microphone. It really, really always is a pleasure and a joy to be here with all of you. And this is, I think, the first Easter Sunday that I've actually brought a word. So it's very special to me as well. I think it's also important, as Joseph said at the very beginning, that we acknowledge that it's Easter Sunday within the Western tradition. It's Palm Sunday within the Eastern Orthodox tradition. It's the second day of Passover, and in the wake of a full moon, for those of us who practice earth-based traditions, it's a moment of focus and of great power. So the one thing you want to know is that if there was a day to come to church, today's the day. You can pretty much make anything manifest. Not like you can't do that every other day, but certainly today is a good day. I also wanted to acknowledge that while I know that the theme of the month is trust, my sermon title is The Myth of Power. And I think that on these days when there's a great deal of focus and attention paid to the actions of ancestors that have done remarkable things still in our own mind and our own consciousness, that there is a causal relationship between the capacity that we have to trust and the experience of power in our own lives. And so that's what I want to spend a little time playing with, because I want to also acknowledge those people who are taking that walk and beginning that walk as prayer chaplains. Because if you ask any one of them, what do they know now about trust that they did not know 9 months ago? You should actually sit down and let them just begin to tell you what they now know about the idea of trust that they didn't know some time ago. And all of us have that kind of experience where there is something about when we trust in fill in the blank. There is an experience of power that we have in that moment. And yet, that is not a lived experience every moment of every day. We relegate the idea of power as if it's something special, as opposed to something that we could experience ongoingly every day. So, you know, I go to the Holy Word of Merriam-Webster. That's where I usually start the preparation of any talk. Far greater sages have figured out what some of these words that we use mean. So when we look at the definition of trust, it is an assured reliance. Assured reliance on the character, ability, strength, or truth of someone or something. And I like the idea of assured reliance, because it doesn't mean that it came out of nowhere. Like over a series of time, you actually come to know, to be assured and rely on the character, the ability, the strength, or the truth, not just of people, but of things, of circumstances. That there is a dependence on something future or contingent. Another way of saying that is that there is hope. So in trust, when you trust someone or something, there is a hope for the future, for things that can and or will happen. When we look at the definition of power, it says the ability to act or produce an effect. The ability to act or produce an effect. So it's one thing to trust, but the actions that we take based on what we trust based on who we trust is actually what has power come into our lives. So it's not just the trusting itself, because we could just sit and trust and be paralyzed and take no further actions. But the true expression of trust is to act with what you trust in. So the question then becomes, what do you actually trust God with? What do you actually trust God with? Or is God spirit, higher mind, divine intelligence, your reserve for trouble? And that's fine. That could be okay. But in the inquiry, we might be able to see that there's more that we could trust God with and then experience more power on a day-to-day basis. Another way to ask the question is, maybe, what don't you trust God with? What are you holding on to that you think is uniquely yours? And I'm not saying this because I haven't had this experience myself, even as of today. But there is something for us to inquire into what am I not turning over? What don't I trust? Do I trust God with my finances? Like we say that we don't worry as a New Thought community. We don't worry about money. Everybody worry free about money? You know, I may be one of the only single people in the room. You're kind of like, anybody worrying about being partnered before they throw dirt on your face? You know, like at a particular moment, you're kind of like, come on. I'm degrading here. You know, some of you may have children, and I'm not even going to bother to ask you, have you surrendered all worry about your children, no matter how old they are? My mother, I am going to be 51 years old, and my mother still worries about some things. I give her reason to, in some instances. And so there is, though, this experience between trust, in the living of trusting, that allows us to have power. So the first myth, if you will, is that we are comfortable being powerful beings. So we talk a good game about being powerful. And we talk a good game about being connected to the divine and all that that entails. But really, how comfortable are we with being powerful? It's Easter Sunday. We have one of the greatest examples of a powerful human being that was all human and all divine, whose sole purpose was to come and to show the Jewish people what's the pathway to be reconciled, that there would never, ever again be a question about whether you belonged to God or not. That happened more than 2,000 years ago, with the promise that the things that I do, you will do those things and greater than I have done. So the question is, do you see yourself in that expression of what that being did? And do you see yourself in the expression of what's greater than that? And in simple terms, how's it going with loving everybody? What's the status of looking at someone, whether it's in the market or on the subway or somebody you might be passing on the highway, and saying, that person really looks in trouble. I'm going to relieve the trouble of that person, and I'm not going to even take my foot off the gas. How's that going with relieving the suffering that we see around us? And so all of this to say that there is a gap in the experience that we have, even though not just the Christ, but we have examples throughout time of people who moved beyond what they physically saw and took action, not because they actually had done it before, but because they trusted that the action that they were engaging in was for their highest good and the highest good of those around them. And we are still in our infancy, if you will, in the development of ourselves as both human being and spiritual being, with being able to access and live within and live as a powerful being. One of the things that happens sometimes within the Christian community is this idea of recalling the 7 last words of the Christ as he was going through the crucifixion experience and on the cross. And one of those words had to do with, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, was one of the last words that Christ spoke. And while as a New Thought community, we practice and hone the idea of affirmative prayer, I want to suggest that there's something else called declarative prayer. And I don't know if anybody's ever said that before. I don't know if it's a real thing. I don't know if somebody's going to, quantify that. And I don't really care, because Jesus didn't say, if you feel like it, Father, maybe tomorrow, while I'm in the tomb, would you please forgive them for what they're doing? There was something declarative about, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And there's no space in there for misunderstanding or confusion. It's forgive them. What's our relationship to having speech like that? To being in ourselves and in our families and in our communities as people of power. We've got some growing to do. The second myth is that power is bad. That power in and of itself is a bad thing. Because what we see, what we usually either talk about or see or hear about, is this idea of the misuse of power and how power is used by people to in some way take from others what is rightfully theirs or diminish them in some way. But we don't see enough examples of when power is used to heal, to love, to uplift. And so we have this disconnected idea of what power is. And if you are looking at what power is supposed to be, you don't really want to be associated with that. You don't want to be associated with people who set up financial things that destroy systems. You don't want to be set up with ideas of people taking their rights or arguing about their rights. You don't want to be associated with power like that. Gary Zukav gives us a nice framework for this in The Seat of the Soul. He distinguishes between external power and authentic power. And external power has to do with what can your 5 senses actually discern, and the manipulation of what you actually see in the world, and that's all that there is. So the experience of external power is trying to manipulate and play with just what you see out of your 5 senses. And he suggests that as part of our evolution as both human and spiritual beings, that there will come a time, and we're beginning to see this, and all of us, I think, have had this experience where we see beyond the five senses. It's not just what you see, but it's just, and you can't necessarily even give language to it, but some of us call it intuition. Some of us call it the knowing. Some of us call it connected to the divine mind. But there is this experience beyond the physical, not just that we see things in trance or in meditation, but that we actually can do things. We can actually move things and make things happen, that we can actually produce results as we strengthen that connection that we have to the divine that is beyond the five senses. And that is authentic power. That is power that has lasted the entire time that humankind has struggled with the idea of, is there something greater? Am I just it? Or is there something that I can access that I can't even see? And we all have developed over time where people look to see, how much can I access that? The interesting thing about the Passover story, as we're in the second day of Passover, is that the people trusted that if we do as the divine has said through Moses and through Aaron and put the blood of lambs over our doors, that we trust that the spirit of death will pass by us, will pass over our homes. Those rituals are to remind them and remind us, if we're paying attention, that trust is a practice. You don't just trust one time. And if trust is ever broken, it is one of the most delicate things to re-knit back together. But it can be done. And so we see in these examples, how much time do I have? Thank you. So we see in these examples the opportunity to operate from our highest intention, not knowing how that intention is actually going to be fulfilled. One of the things that the pastor of a church that I belong to, Senior Bishop Zachary Jones, used to say was that, and it went through me, was that God will never give you a desire and not give you a way to fulfill it. God will never give you a desire and not show you the pathway to fulfill it. And you may not like the pathway. That's my part that I added on. And so maybe power isn't bad. And maybe even external power is not bad, because it actually does show us it's the foundation upon which we learn and experience and play with authentic power. But the disconnection between knowing yourself as a powerful being and knowing what's available for the universe if you step into being all that you know you could possibly be. That's a sad moment. And the way to actually relieve that sadness and move powerfully through life is just to play. Because in the same way that we don't learn trust right away, we don't necessarily have to know ourselves as powerful right away. But you want to get in that game. You want to play that game. And here's the bad news. You're in the game whether you like it or not. This was not a game you had to buy a ticket for. This is not like Duke and Wisconsin, go Blue Devils. Not that I'm biased. This isn't that kind of game. We're just in the game by nature of the fact that we are drawing breath in and out. And that's a good thing. So the last myth is I am powerful by myself, and I can do it all by myself. There's this interesting disconnect between the idea, and I think it's actually a mistake, when we look at spiritual figures like the Christ. And I'm talking about Jesus today because it's Easter Sunday, so, it's kind of appropriate. But it just seems to me that there's this experience at looking at the life of Jesus and looking at the life of all of the sacred holders, if you will, that somehow they did all of this by themselves. And the lessons that there are for us to gain are as them, excuse me, as individual beings. But without the lepers, Jesus wouldn't have had anybody to heal. Without Mary Magdalene and his mother and those that went to the tomb to see that the stone had been moved away, without them, there's no one to tell the story. It's just an empty tomb. And so none of us, as much as we might want to hold on to that idea, none of us gets through this life by ourselves. None of us do. And even if you don't have the people with you that you would like, you still don't get out of it by yourself. Your experience, my experience, our experience of power and of trust comes from being in community. How much do you just trust yourself with when it's just you? There's some things you can kind of like rely on yourself. And then there's other stuff you're kind of like, what, if left up to me? Yeah. Like if this was left up to me, let me tell you what I would do. I'd burn it all down or whatever it is, right? And so our opportunity to actually learn trust and learn power comes in community. And to just go back to the definitions again, that there's an assured reliance. That's what trust is, an assured reliance on the character, ability, strength, or truth of someone or something. And the thing to take away, without trust, there is no power. Have you noticed that the things and the people that you don't trust in, they actually are fine. You are powerless around them. And so we can begin to trust, begin to use what we know of trust, that assured reliance in the areas of our life where we want to grow, where we want to expand, where we see that we are more, and begin to live that life. So I want to leave you with a meditation that's in Science of Mind on freedom. And if you think about it, if you're living a life where you are trusting and where you're experiencing power, isn't that kind of what freedom is like? So it says that, yes, I know that the truth has freed me from the bonds of fear. I am not afraid. I adore thee, most high within me. I trust in thee and abide in that hope that knows no fear. I am free spirit and cannot be bound. The one life flowing through me is perfect and complete. I am not apart from it. I am one with it in marvelous unity and freedom, one with the complete whole. I was born free and must always remain free. The realization of freedom permeates my whole being and sinks into the innermost parts of me. I love it, adore it, I accept it. I am free. Let trust and your power bring freedom to you, to your family, to your communities, and let us pray that it comes to the world. Thank you so much.